The first person I thought of was someone I had not spoken to in a decade. My sister Rebecca and I ended our relationship with bitter final words over our mother's will, but her name was the first thing that surfaced when the doctor left the room. I am a 48-year-old history teacher, a man who believes in clear, linear narratives. My life has been a quiet story of cause and effect written in a small Ohio town. This hospital room, however, felt like a tear in the page, a place of sterile smells and quiet panic. My 12-year-old son, Leo, was asleep in the bed, looking pale and fragile. The doctor's diagnosis was a clinical description of a nightmare called aortic valve stenosis. He used calm, professional language to explain how my son's heart was failing him. My wife, Sarah, sat beside me, her posture rigid with a strength I did not feel. She was tracing patterns on Leo's blanket, a small, repetitive motion to keep from shattering. We listened as the doctor mentioned a surgical procedure with an impossible price tag. He said a number that felt less like a cost and more like a wall. It was a sum designed to remind you that some problems are simply too big to solve. We had a mortgage, 2 cars, and what we thought was good health insurance. We were not supposed to be in this story, yet here we were, and in that moment of absolute powerlessness, my mind betrayed me and went straight to Rebecca. It was a shameful, desperate reflex I could not control. The most unsettling part was not the diagnosis or the cost. It was realizing my first instinct was to think of the money she had. Before the hospital, our lives were measured by the comforting rhythm of school semesters. I taught American history to teenagers who mostly stared out the window, but I found a deep, quiet satisfaction in the order of it all. Each year had a clear beginning, a messy middle, and a definitive end. Our home was a small brick house with a yard that I mowed on Saturdays. Sarah and I had built a life that felt safe and predictable. We had an easy rhythm, a partnership built on 15 years of shared history. This peaceful world was a fortress I had carefully constructed after my war with Rebecca. The final argument over our mother's estate feels like it was yesterday. It happened in a sterile lawyer's office that smelled like old paper. She accused me of poisoning our mother's mind against her in those final years. I told her that she only ever saw our parents in terms of their assets. The things we said were carefully chosen weapons meant to cause permanent wounds. We both succeeded in that awful objective, leaving the family shattered. I chose to build a smaller, simpler life without her in it. For years, I told myself that this was the only way to find peace. I actively ignored the few olive branches that were extended over the years. She sent Leo an expensive-looking card for his 10th birthday. I threw it in the recycling bin before Sarah or Leo ever saw it. I justified it as protecting my son from her transactional view of love. My cousin once called to say Rebecca had asked about me. I told him that I was not interested and changed the subject immediately. I was so certain that my silence was a form of strength and control. That false normal I created now feels like the most arrogant delusion. The hint that something was wrong was always there, a quiet, humming anxiety. It was the feeling that my peace was conditional, built on a foundation of denial. The first break came on a Tuesday after a week of pure desperation. We had spent days on the phone with the insurance company listening to hold music. We sat at our small kitchen table surrounded by piles of useless paper. Each document was just a different way of saying no in official language. I watched Sarah research obscure medical charities, her face illuminated by the pale blue light of her laptop. She was trying so hard to find a path, but every door was closed. I felt the full weight of my own uselessness during those awful days. I was a father who could not protect his son from a random accident of biology. My illusion of control, of being the family provider, was completely gone. Then the phone rang, a call from the hospital's financial services office. A woman with a calm, bureaucratic voice delivered the news without any ceremony. She stated that an anonymous donation had been made to cover Leo's surgery. The full amount, every last cent of it, was already in a hospital account. She said the benefactor wished to remain completely unknown to us. Sarah broke down beside me, her weeping filled with a sudden, shocking relief. I held her, feeling the solid ground returning beneath our feet for the first time. The world snapped back into focus, bright with impossible hope. The weight on my chest simply vanished, and I could breathe again. But as the call ended, the woman added a quiet, unsettling detail. She said the donor was insistent on anonymity, but had specific knowledge of Leo's case. That single phrase stuck in my mind, a small, sharp object in the relief. It suggested this was not a random act of charity from a stranger. The miracle suddenly felt personal, targeted, and intensely complicated. We spent the next few days in a strange bubble of manufactured joy. Sarah called our closest friends, her voice bright with the miracle we received. I found myself creating a convenient story to explain our impossible good fortune. I told people we suspected it was a local tech founder known for quiet philanthropy. I described a man I had only read about in the newspaper. Repeating this lie felt like a necessary act of self-preservation. It gave a face to the miracle, making it feel less complicated and personal. Sarah embraced this story completely, relieved to have a simple answer. She told me I needed to stop analyzing it and just accept our blessing. Her relief was so pure that my own growing suspicion felt like a betrayal. I felt a deep, misplaced guilt for not being able to share her simple happiness. My mind kept returning to the detail about the donor's specific knowledge. On Thursday, I called my Aunt Carol, my mother's older sister. I started the call by sharing the wonderful news about Leo's future. She was overjoyed, telling me she had been praying for us every night. Then, I casually mentioned the anonymous donation that had made it all possible. A sudden, heavy silence hung on the line for a few seconds. I could almost hear the careful thoughts forming in her mind. She finally said that some people in our family just do things their own way. She then immediately changed the subject, asking how my history classes were going. Her careful evasion was a louder confession than any direct admission would have been. After the call, my flimsy wall of denial completely crumbled. The confusion was suffocating, a mix of gratitude for the act and resentment for the method. Leo's surgery was officially scheduled for the following week, a definitive date on the calendar. The hospital's administrative machine required more paperwork from us for their records. I found myself in a small, windowless office across from a tired-looking clerk. He handed me a thick folder containing copies of our financial and insurance documents. I was supposed to verify the information and sign a few final forms. As I methodically turned the pages, a single sheet of paper slipped out. It was clearly misplaced, a document not meant for my eyes. It was a printed summary of the donation, an internal record of the transaction. At the bottom, there was a short handwritten note to the hospital's finance director. The handwriting was elegant and precise, with sharp, angular letters that I knew instantly. It was the same script from every birthday card she had sent me as a child. It was my sister Rebecca's handwriting, as familiar to me as my own reflection. I felt a jolt, a cold shock that ran straight through my chest. Then I looked at the top of the page at the printed business information. It was not her name, but the name of a private equity firm. It was the same firm she had founded with the inheritance money we had fought over. The proof was absolute and undeniable, a cold fact in a sterile office. The last remnants of my denial evaporated under the harsh fluorescent lights. This was not a miracle from a stranger. It was a calculated move in a long finished war. This act of kindness was a power play, a reminder of what she had and what I did not. The truth of it settled in my gut, a sick feeling of being indebted to my greatest rival. The surgeon came out to the waiting room with a calm and reassuring smile. He informed us that the procedure on Leo had been a complete success. Sarah collapsed into my arms, all of her fear finally dissolving into tears. I held her and felt the enormous wave of relief wash over me, but my relief was quickly followed by a cold and unfamiliar anger. I sat by Leo's bed in the recovery room for hours that afternoon. His breathing was deep and even, the color returning to his cheeks. The steady beep of the heart monitor was no longer a sound of dread. Instead, each pulse sounded like a coin dropping into a slot. It was the sound of a debt being counted, a transaction I never agreed to. The gratitude I was supposed to feel was being choked by a profound sense of humiliation. My sister had not saved my son out of love. She had asserted her dominance. She had swooped in from her wealthy world to solve a problem I could not. This act made me a failure in my own life story, a supporting character. That evening, I went home to shower and found my mother's old address book. Rebecca's direct office number was still listed on the back page. My hand was steady as I dialed, my new anger a solid thing inside me. She answered with a crisp, professional tone, not recognizing my number. I told her who was calling, and then I asked her my one simple question. I asked her why she would choose to do it in such a cold and distant way. There was a long, calculated silence on the other end of the line. She then said that she only did what was necessary for her nephew. Before I could say another word, she quietly disconnected the call. I stood in the hallway of our empty house holding a silent phone. The final disconnecting click from her end was the only confession I needed. It was an act of supreme indifference, a clear statement of her power. She had confirmed everything I suspected by refusing to speak about it. I drove back to the hospital with a cold, heavy feeling in my stomach. I found Sarah sitting by Leo's bedside, her face relaxed with relief. I told her everything in a low, urgent voice right there in the quiet room. I explained the misplaced document and the familiar, sharp angles of Rebecca's handwriting. I described the stilted phone call and her cold, dismissive final words. I expected her to feel the same sense of violation that I felt. I wanted her to share my anger, to be my ally in this. Instead, she just stared at me with an expression of weary disbelief. She asked me how I could be so focused on my pride at a time like this. She said my sister, regardless of our past, had just saved our son's life. She saw an olive branch where I saw a carefully thrown stone. The perfect, unbreakable bond between us suddenly fractured right there. She told me that we had a moral obligation to send a thank you note. She said we could address it to the firm for an anonymous benefactor. I told her we would absolutely not be thanking anyone for this, that we would not acknowledge the gift or the giver in any way. The argument was quiet, but it was the worst one of our marriage. A shocking, cold silence filled the space between us, more isolating than any shout. The cold silence between Sarah and me became a permanent fixture in our home. We moved around each other like strangers, our shared history now a minefield of unspoken resentments. She saw my anger as a destructive form of pride, a selfish flaw. I saw her gratitude as a form of surrender, a willing acceptance of my humiliation. There was no longer any common ground between us, only the quiet presence of our healthy son. I stopped looking for answers or trying to understand my sister's complex motivations. Understanding felt like a luxury I could not afford. It was a form of acceptance. My search for peace was over, replaced by a singular, cold objective. I needed to act, to take back the power that had been so casually stripped from me. The debt was not just financial. It felt like a moral stain on my life. The plan formed late one night as I sat alone in our dark living room. It was a financially ruinous idea, a desperate and morally gray act of self-preservation. I decided I would pay her back every single dollar, even if it cost us everything. I would erase her grand gesture and make it a simple, paid-in-full transaction. I knew with absolute certainty that Sarah would never agree to this course of action. She would see it as madness, as risking our family's future over a ghost. So I began the process in secret, a deep betrayal of the partnership we once had. The following Monday, I went to our local bank, a place of quiet professionalism. I sat in a comfortable chair across from a loan officer named Kevin. He smiled and spoke in the soothing, detached language of finance. He talked about cash-out refinancing, amortization schedules, and variable interest rates. I listened and nodded, playing the part of a responsible homeowner making a prudent choice. He had no idea he was helping me procure the ammunition for a deeply personal war. I was using the cold, impersonal tools of her world against her. Signing the final stack of documents felt like a definitive, irreversible act. Each stroke of the pen on the thick, important paper was a small victory. This was not a moment of joy, but one of grim, resolute satisfaction. It was the feeling of a surgeon performing a necessary, painful amputation to stop a poison from spreading. The money from the new mortgage appeared in our bank account the following Friday. It was a dizzyingly large number on a screen, a figure that represented 30 years of future work. The reality of my decision had not yet set in. It was just a tool for the task ahead. I went to a different bank across town to get the cashier's check. I did not want the familiar tellers from my own branch asking friendly questions. I had the check made out for the exact amount of the surgery, down to the last cent. Back home, I typed a short, brutally simple note on a plain piece of paper. The note contained only 4 words for her to read, "We are now even." I placed the check and the note into a stiff business envelope. I mailed it to the corporate address I had memorized from the hospital form. That single act felt like firing the first real shot in my quiet war. Then came the week of unbearable silent waiting, which was a unique form of torture. I would check the mail every single day with a nervous, obsessive energy. Sarah noticed my agitation, but simply attributed it to the stress of Leo's recovery. The first real-world consequence of my actions arrived in our mailbox. It was the first bill for our new, much larger mortgage payment. The number on the page was a stark black and white reminder of the enormous risk I had taken. It was a secret I had to carry alone in our fracturing home. Then, 10 days after I sent it, the original envelope I mailed reappeared. It was stuffed into our mailbox, my own handwriting staring back at me. Inside, there was no letter or explanation for its sudden return. There was only the cashier's check, torn cleanly and precisely in half. The message was unmistakable, a cold and silent act of supreme contempt. She was refusing my repayment, refusing to let me end this. The cold resolve I had built around myself completely shattered. It was replaced by a hot, blinding rage at my own powerlessness. I stood in my study for a long time, holding the 2 worthless halves of the check. The hot rage had finally burned itself out, leaving behind a terrifying and simple clarity. She had refused a transaction, so I was going to force one on her. This was no longer about being even. It was about a definitive, final ending. There was only one significant source of money left that I could access without Sarah. I went to my computer and logged into the website for my retirement account. It was the 401k I had diligently contributed to for over 20 years of teaching. The website displayed multiple flashing warnings about the severe tax penalties for early liquidation. I clicked past all of them without a moment of hesitation. I was sacrificing the security of my future for the sanity of my present. The process was cold and impersonal. A few clicks to undo a lifetime of careful saving. A few days later, the diminished sum appeared in my checking account. Next, I needed a delivery method that she could not tear in half. I called my cousin David, the same one who had mentioned Rebecca asking about me. I told him a carefully constructed lie about a final, small inheritance disbursement. I said I needed her account number to deposit the funds directly for tax reasons. He was eager to help, a good man trying to mend a family he did not break. He gave me the information I needed without any suspicion. The wire transfer at the bank was an irreversible and anonymous electronic act. The money was now hers, a fact that could not be denied or returned. Then I went home and delivered the final cruel blow I had been planning. I composed a new email and added 3 people to the recipient list. It included my sister Rebecca, my Aunt Carol, and my cousin David. The subject line contained only 3 words written like an epitaph, "paid in full." The body of the email was completely blank, containing only an attached image file. It was a clean screenshot of the successful wire transfer confirmation. My finger hovered over the button for a moment, and then I clicked send. After I clicked send, I waited for the angry phone calls that never came. There were no furious emails from Rebecca, no shocked texts from my aunt. My cousin David never reached out to ask about the strange, cryptic message. My final catastrophic blow was met with a deep, bottomless, and united silence. The money was never sent back. The transfer was simply accepted without comment. I had screamed my victory into a void, and the void did not even bother to echo. The war was over, but only because the other side refused to acknowledge it had ever begun. That silence from my family was its own clear and final judgment. I had made them witnesses to my scorched earth campaign, and they had quietly turned away. At home, life with Sarah settled into a new and terrible normal. We became excellent household administrators, discussing bills and grocery lists with detached efficiency. We no longer fought, because there was nothing left to fight about. I had made my decisions in secret, and that secrecy had built a permanent wall between us. The new mortgage payment is a constant, heavy presence in our lives. It dictates everything we do and everything we can no longer do. I had traded a debt of pride for one of crushing, real-world financial weight. I still watch Leo, now fully recovered, running in the backyard with his friends. He is healthy and vibrant, completely unaware of the ruin I created to save him. He is the tangible proof of my victory, the prize I had fought so hard for. I look at him, at his easy smile and his thoughtless joy, and I feel nothing. There is no peace here, no comfort, and certainly no lessons learned from any of it. My obsession is gone, and it has left a vast, cold emptiness in its place. I am free from my sister's influence, but that freedom is just another word for isolation. If you enjoyed this video, support it with a like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with your thoughts. Your reaction helps me create new stories.